It provides a cultural opportunity for students as well as the community to explore the rich heritage of St. Bernard and the New Orleans area.
It's my pleasure to introduce our lecturer. I just want to let you know that if you look on the back of your program, you'll see the different types of lectures we've had and some tremendous lectures. I'm very proud of this. Dr. Manning's vision, he brought this to my attention, as he said, 6 years ago. It's been a tremendous success. We've had some tremendous lecturers and speakers, as you well know, and that's why we have such a nice crowd tonight. We really appreciate your taking time to be with us on the first Monday of every month during the school year, and we appreciate all that you've done for us with this History Lecture Series. Hopefully, we've made it something that's inviting, something that's enjoyable, and something that you look forward to. And tonight is another one. This is one that came up, and we talked about a lot of things, and if you look on the back, we have a lot of different topics. But along the way, we said, gee, you know, we've had some tremendous governors and some real famous governors, whether they were good, bad, or indifferent. So tonight, once again, our lecturer, who is incidentally, this I think is his 8th lecture for this particular series over 6 years. Not that he hadn't done a whole lot of other things and taught history along the way, and I think he lectures to everybody in the town that asked him to. But he's done a tremendous job, and this, I believe, is his 8th lecture in the History Lecture Series, and it's about famous governors of Louisiana. I'm as interested as you all, having been a historian myself. I'm looking forward to it, and I'd like to present Ron Chapman, the lecturer for tonight. Thank you, Ron, for all you've done for us.
Thank you, Don. No, I think I'm alive and well on the mic. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah. All right, great, great. So now we begin. Louisiana's governors. In some cases, it might also be referred to as the Rogues Gallery. But we've got some interesting people, and there were so many of them when you get down to it. Louisiana's governors, we had 72 total governors. A lot of people forget, but we have to go back to the colonial period. I mean, Iberville and Bienville found this general area in 1699. They would come from France. They come from Spain. They come from England, believe it or not, because if you listen to the Weather Channel or on the Weatherman, they refer to the Florida parishes. That section of the Florida parishes, which is east of the Mississippi River and north of the lakes, was actually British territory. We'll get into it later. It was the 14th colony. There weren't 13 American colonies. There were 14. A lot of people forget that. That was a loyalist colony, and it was defeated by the Spanish. So the governor, John Campbell, I guess you'd have to count him as a Louisiana governor as well. And of course, the United States. You get into France, he ruled from 1699 to 1762, which is 63 years. 11 men served as governor during that time. An interesting character, one that I really won't get into any detail right now, what I find most interesting is Pierre Clement Lassat in 1803. What happened, he came to Louisiana under the belief sent by Napoleon that he would rule for 20 years. Instead, he got 19 days. But in that 19 days, he did an amazing thing. Louisiana was Spanish at the time, so he insisted that Salcedo turn over the keys to the city, which at that time, the only thing they had for a key was the key to the old St. Charles Fort. He says, I'll take it. So he takes it, becomes governor, and in 19 days, makes Louisiana French again, so that when the Americans take over under Claiborne, they have to deal with the French and not the Spanish authorities. So it's an interesting switch that they have there, and this was his chance to pay back the French after what had happened to them when they were sold out to the Spanish. This is the French flag with the fleur-de-lis. Now we know where it comes from. Actually, if you go back in time, you'll find that Charles Martel had fleur-de-lis in some of the tapestries behind his head. So it's a real symbol of New Orleans and Louisiana into France. Spain, It ruled from 1762 to 1803, which is the time of the Louisiana Purchase, for 41 years. 9 different men served under Spain. And if it'll work. Somebody? Oh, there we are. It's coming slowly, I guess. The signal takes a while to make it across the room. The United States rules as a territory from 1803 to 1813, which is 10 years. From 1813 to present as a state is 194 years. There are 52 different persons, and I mention that particularly because we now have a female governor, served as governor. Okay, multiple service. How many governors served more than one time? The winner is Bienville. He serves 4 different terms. He comes here at the age of 18, and he leaves at the age of his mid-60s. Okay? He's an amazing man. In the United States, you have Claiborne, who serves twice, once as a territorial governor, and surprisingly, he's elected as governor of Louisiana. He didn't expect that. He figured a Creole would win. Roman served twice. Francis T. Nichols served twice. Earl K. Long served 3 times. Jimmy Davis served twice. And Edwin Edwards served 3 times. He's serving in a different capacity at the moment. The only African-American governor is PBGS Pinchback, who you read some things about. And apparently, from one of the things I've read, which I haven't been able to document too well, is he may have been a riverboat gambler earlier on in his life. He fought with the Union Army, but he resigned because there was a real problem with the Union Army in the sense that the privates and the officers never wanted to treat African Americans as equals. So he got angry about the fact that the privates and the white privates wouldn't give him the honor he felt he was due by wearing the bars he was wearing. So he immediately resigned from the service. He decided to enter politics during the Reconstruction period. When Henry Clay Warmoth, who's the guy who's famous for saying, "I didn't come to Louisiana to be governor to take a vow of poverty," and walked out making a fortune, he was forced to leave through impeachment. Pinchback takes over and serves for 35 days, from December 9th, 1872 to January. So that's one of the shortest periods of service. This is Pinchback. This is Kathleen Blanco. She's the first female governor of Louisiana, Kathleen Babineau Blanco, born December 15th, 1942. I don't know if she appreciates having her age put up there. BS in Education at USL, which with an education degree, it makes you wonder why there isn't more focus on recovery and education here, but I guess I'll let that slide. That's a personal feeling I have. Public service, she was a state representative from 1984 to 88, Public Service Commissioner from 88 to 95, Lieutenant Governor from 95 to 2003, and then Governor from 2003 to President, and she's just announced that she's not going to run again. So let's talk about the Frenchman a little bit. We're going to try to take a few selective pieces. It's like a Whitman sampler's box. The only trouble is you can't pick them out and punch a hole in a squeeze in the middle to see what's on the inside, you know, so you just have to kind of work through this. Bienville, called the father of Louisiana. He's born in 1680. He's one of 14 children, and you'll find in Louisiana with Iberville, Bienville, has got a mess of kids that work their way through Louisiana in different capacities. He arrives in 1699 with Iberville. They arrive at Ship Island and they're exploring the whole area, and it's he and his brother who go around the mouth of the river, and on Mardi Gras Day, 1699, discover the mouth of the Mississippi River and start working their way up. He then, his brother Iberville leaves to go get resupplied. Bienville then takes back, he's only 18 years old, decides to go back up the Mississippi River, discovers the Natchez Indian tribes, Point Coupé, Baton Rouge, which he names Baton Rouge Red Stick because there's a column out there, they think it's a cypress tree, a red cypress that's covered in animal skins and all that, marked the boundary line between the Bayou Gulas and the Houma Indians. It was red from blood and from being painted or what have you. He called it Baton Rouge, and the name still stays. He's also famous for English Turn, and the story there is on his second trip up the Mississippi River and coming down, a lot of people don't realize how the Mississippi was contested. The British had a planned operation of an overland travel expedition across the mountains to the present site of Memphis, and they had a ship that was supposed to come up the Mississippi River and join there. They were going to set up a colony and basically short-circuit all the trade coming down the Mississippi River. When Bienville, 18 years old, is coming down in his canoe, he sees this British ship sitting right there in the bend in the river. It couldn't make it around. It's 270 degrees. It's a sailing ship on one side, so he made as far as it did, dropped the hook, and waited for the wind to shift. He sees it, and with the moxie of a Frenchman, decides to paddle up to it and inform them that they're in French soil. There's a French fleet right around the bend. He was sent down and informed them to move, or he'd blow them out the water. gets in his canoe, paddles back upstream. You have this image of him hiding behind the bushes, looking to see if it really took. Sure enough, the British hoist anchor, turn around and leave, and that's why it's called English Turn. Had they not left, there's no telling, because the British would have had the first presence here. So it's an amazing feat. He would serve under kings. He would serve under Antoine Crozat. He would serve under John Law and the Mississippi Company, and that's when he would found the city of New Orleans. There's a story there that his engineer, LeBlanc de la Tour, suggested that he move it up further, like around Manchaca, because it was too low here. He fired LeBlanc de la Tour and hired Pogger in his place to be his engineer. Maybe Latour was right, I'm not sure. He retired in 1743. When he comes back the last time, after the Chickasaw War, he served 30 years, but if you know anything about this period, you know that the Natchez Indians wiped out the entire colony of Natchez and beyond. He lost so many of his friends. He was brokenhearted. He felt like he really hadn't satisfied the king as far as accomplishing what he had to accomplish in Louisiana, begged for retirement, was allowed to retire, and went back to France. He was immediately investigated for some of his activities that was going on. There was a lot of question about that because people accused one another. There's politics like there is today, and everybody's writing letters denouncing one another. So whether there's any basis to the corruption or not is not known. But apparently the kings, in reviewing his record, decided that they weren't going to take any charges against him. The last time we have any historical account of him is in 1764, when France is turned over to Spain by a secret treaty of San Ildefonso. And what happens is the Frenchmen here are horrified. They go to France immediately and hope to see Father Bienville, hoping that he could intercede with the king to allow France to keep Louisiana. He's 82 years old. Everybody he knows is dead. So he has no connections at all anymore, but that's the last reference we have. And he dies at the age of 87, which is quite remarkable when you look at the man who went through what he had gone through. Then we come under the Spanish. Now, is that an Irish name or what? Alejandro O'Reilly. What happened, the Spanish really didn't want Louisiana. It was kind of forced on them. And they decided, oh, well, I guess we'll have to take it for a good buffer zone between the English colonies and ourselves. So they sent a governor by the name of Ulloa. Well, Ulloa didn't get along with anybody, so the Frenchmen proceeded to stick him on his boat and send him downriver. You could argue that that's the first American Revolution, because it's taking place at around the same time. And there were some elements that were talking Republic and others that didn't know what they wanted. They just didn't want Ulloa. When word gets back to King Carlos of Spain III, what had happened, he's kind of doesn't exactly know what to do about it because he's not enamored of the Louisiana colony. But his agents tell him, and his advisors say, you cannot allow this sort of an insult to happen because who knows how far it'll go. You've got to suppress this rebellion. In which case he finds Alejandro O'Reilly. So what's his story? He comes from Ireland, 1725. He joins the Spanish military as a young man, starts working his way up in the service. And one of the great ways to get a promotion is to save the king's life, which he does when there's a riot in Madrid. And as a consequence, Carlos immediately promotes him, gives him all sorts of honors, and gives him a detachment of troops. It's around this time that the problems with Ulloa are starting to surface. So in 1769, Carlos sends him to Louisiana in order to quell the rebellion. He arrives here with 2,000 troops. Needless to say, he's going to make an impression. When he arrives, he meets with the leaders of the rebellion. They, of course, are saying, oh, we have nothing against the king of Spain. No, we just didn't like Ulloa. Please forgive us. We would never do anything as an affront to Spain. He listens. Then he holds a trial, and he decides to execute the leaders, which was Nicolas Lafreniere, Pierre Marquet, Jean Olin, which is a relative of Bienville, Pierre Solis, Joseph Millier, and Joseph Villeray actually dies beforehand when they're captured. What he does is it's kind of clever. Before he has the trial, he has a dinner at his house and invites all these guys over. So they come, drink wine, have a wonderful dinner. Everything's great. They figure it's cool. He's forgiven them. Everything's on an even course. When they walk out, the gendarmes waiting for him, immediately arrest him. He used the dinner to get them all together. He loads them on a boat, a prison boat in the middle of the Mississippi. Villaray's wife hears about it, rows out to the boat, and starts hailing her husband. He runs up to the rail of the boat, and rumor has it he tried to get off to get to her. The Spaniards kill him and take his shirt and throw it in the boat with his wife, and that's the end of him. The rest of the conspirators he either puts in prison and sends them to Havana, And the rest of the society, though, he forgives, and he felt like they had fallen under the control of these leaders. He then appoints Gonzaga as governor to take his place. He's a military man, he's not a political man. October 1770, he leaves for Spain. He's only around for 9 months. But in the 9 months, he dissolves the Superior Council, which is the French governor at the time, and establishes the Cabildo. The Cabildo is not a building. The Cabildo is a form of government. It just that it got the name at the building because they met in this particular facility. Okay? He set price controls on food, set weights and measurages, because if you can imagine, people were cheating one another at that time, so he made sure they weren't, but he went out and sent agents out to make sure when something was a pound weight, there was actually a pound weight they were using. Imagine that. He establishes the parish system, holds a colony census because he has no idea how many people are here or where they are. He wants to find that out. He's a military man. He limits the number of taverns. Can you imagine doing that in Louisiana today? Amazing. He reinforces relations with the Indians, and what he does there is extremely clever. He first gives them all sorts of gifts, and he invites them to a big party where he again gives them gifts. When they're all gathered around and watching, he holds what's called a sham battle, where he has this, like a scrimmage with his troops. And the Indians are watching it, and they're quite impressed with what they see. What is he doing? He's sending a message to the Native Americans surrounding the area that, hey, I'm not the French, okay? You got 2,000 guys, we've got war dogs, we've got war horses, we've got armors, we've got the ability and the will to kill. So be my friend, I'll give you all these wonderful things. Decide to go to war against me, now you're going to see what you're up against. He's a military man to the core. It's a brilliant tactic. He imposes Spanish laws in place of the French laws. And then he begins an interesting process. He doesn't want to be an army of occupation. He immediately reaches into the French population, puts French members as leaders of the militia. He then turns around and starts appointing Frenchmen to positions in government. What he's trying to do is let the French know that, look, you are going to be part of this thing. This Louisiana is going to be unique. It's not going to be a regular or typical Spanish colony. He then begins public works projects, police, building regulations, which they never had before, organized holidays, that's where you get some of your Catholic holidays, and he starts distributing land on the Spanish land grant system, which is a little bit more efficient, should we say, than the French land grant system, because you never knew what you had under them. He establishes the Code O'Reilly, which liberalizes the black code. Slavery in Louisiana is unique than it is anywhere else in the South because of the Spanish and French traditions. Under the Spanish, a slave could go to the court, ask what they were worth, have a price established for them, and when they raised that money, put the money on the deck, and they were automatically freed. It wasn't to own it. They weren't chattel property per se like they were throughout the English colonies, so it's a different thing. Illegal to hold Indians in slavery. He ends that whole practice there. And he establishes legal reforms where he has different jurisdictions, something we don't have in St. Bernard to this day, where he basically separates criminal from family court, let's say, from civil court. He establishes that system. If you notice in St. Bernard, we have 5 judges, but they all do everything, which I guess it might not be boring for them, but I can see where it would be difficult to handle that variety of different cases. And he also reforms the medical system. So this guy does a whole lot in a short 9 months, okay? Now we come to one of actually my favorites, is Bernardo de Galvez, who St. Bernard is named after. St. Bernard was La Concepcion before that. In 1784, it becomes San Bernardo after St. Bernard, who is the patron saint of Bernardo de Galvez. This is his coat of arms, but it must be an earlier one because I'm looking for I alone on it, and I don't really see it because that's added to his coat of arms after what he does. He's an amazing character. Bernardo de Galvez, born 1746 in Spain. He comes to America. He's in a unique situation. His father is a governor of the Canary Islands. His uncle is the viceroy of Mexico. He comes with his uncle and he starts fighting the Apache Indians, gets wounded, demonstrates his bravery. They then send him back to Spain. From Spain, they send him to France to a naval college. And it's amazing how sometimes things in life just seem to just come together. So he's in France studying naval warfare, which will be important to him later on. He also learns the French language, learns to understand French culture, French food, so he understands to appreciate this particular culture. His father was governor of the Canary Islands, as I had mentioned. This will also play a very important role. In 1777, he's sent to Louisiana as a colonel and interim governor. That's another thing the Spanish did that the French didn't. The French would pull a governor out and just throw another one in. What the Spanish would do if there was a governor in there, they would bring in another governor as head of the military and interim. He would stay there long enough to get the transition, and then one would move and the other would come in. Kind of like a relay race, right? You hold, both people hold on to the baton for a while so they don't drop it. The French were continually dropping it, you know. So as a result, this solved some of the process of organized change of power. He married then, he's a single man, Felice St. Maxent Esterhan, a Creole widow. So now you got a man who speaks French, understands French culture, loves French food, drinks French wine, and is now married to a local Creole girl. How better to marry the Spanish and French relations together in this colony? This is important. He continues the underground support for the American Revolution. A lot of people, I took a textbook I got one time that was sent to me, opened it up to the American Revolution, so what did the Spanish do in it? Looked it up, and the guy said the Spanish did nothing. So I took the book and threw it in the trash where it belonged. Because reality is the Spanish did amazing things. As I alluded earlier to the fact that West Florida was a loyal British colony. But besides that, you had a guy by the name of Oliver Pollock, who was a very wealthy man who had trade up and down the Mississippi River. And what he did, with the respect of Colonel Gibson, who was sent down here by Washington, was open up illicit traffic of ammunition, gunpowder, clothing, whatever the Americans needed, and fed it in the back door up the Mississippi River. George Rogers Clark's adventures, okay, in the old Northwest would not have been successful had it not been supplies coming through this particular area. As a consequence, the English were becoming upset about his activities, and then when Galvez took over, the activities became a little bit more overt. That's when he turns to his father and asks him to bring the Eslanos community back in here. I see we have some wonderful representatives right here, Dot Benj and Bert. Thank you for coming. He requests soldiers, and they come with their families and implements, and this is perhaps one of the greatest immigration groups that comes in. And when they come, he places them in Las Concepcion, Valenzuela, Galveztown, and Barataria. What he's doing is he's locating them in close proximity to the British simply because they are soldiers, and he expects to use them. June 21st, 1779, Spain declares war on Great Britain. You have a war way up in New York called Saratoga, a battle, and the British lose it. France and Spain hate England, and the chance to rub England's nose in the dirt is just too sweet. So when they see this opportunity that, you know, the Americans have been hitting this ball since 1765, it's now 1779, they've been at it for 14 years, they could win it if with a little bit of help. So why don't we throw in? So they decide to declare war, okay? The British, at this time then, order, this is the 14th English colony, Governor John Campbell, to organize troops and attack the city of New Orleans. The trouble is the mail service between England and West Florida is about as good as it is in St. Bernard after the storm, which means, you know, you might get your FEMA check in about 20 months. So as a result, even though it's done way in advance, Campbell doesn't get the letter till after everything's over with ordering him to action. But Galvez does. He finds out about it. So as a result, when he hears this, he organizes an effective attack on the 14th British colony in the American Revolution. Okay? What does he do? He enlists the support of slaves. He promises them their freedom if they fight. Free people of color. He has members of the French militia, Islanos, Spanish soldiers, and Choctaw Indians. And with this group of people, he begins to work his way upriver. He attacks Fort Manchac first. He then moves from there up to Baton Rouge, which is a present site of LSU. He doesn't want to lose anybody because he knows his people are so valuable to him. So what he does is, a clever move, he tells his guys it's night to make as much noise as you possibly can by the front gate of the fort. So he's got guys screaming at one another and hammering and cutting down wood and making all kind of racket. And the British figure, we're getting hit tomorrow from this direction. So they move everything to that part of the fort. And meanwhile, Galvez sneaks around the back of the fort, and the next morning opens up an attack from the front. The British respond. The next thing they get hit in the back door, and it's like, well, you weren't supposed to come from there. You were supposed to come from here. At which point, he takes out Baton Rouge. Once he takes out Baton Rouge, he looks at the commander and says, look, if you want me, I'll cross the river and take out Natchez, or you can just send one of my men with one of your men to request a surrender, which they do. He now takes out Natchez. So single-handedly now, he has basically taken out the land base of West Florida. He then takes an attack on Mobile Bay. He comes down, this is where his naval experience comes in, organizes the fleet, and hits Mobile Bay and attacks Mobile, and succeeds in taking Mobile. He comes back to New Orleans, organizes a bigger fleet, because their big presence is Pensacola. Hurricane, imagine a hurricane. Can you imagine that? Wipes out his fleet. He rebuilds it, launches out a second time, attacks the area right around Santa Rosa Island. And where it gets a little bit of a controversy is that he's got the naval support of Spain from Cuba, a whole fleet, but the admiral doesn't want to cross that spit between, Santa Rosa Island because he thinks it's too shallow, at which point Galvin says, well, I'll do it alone, in which case he runs the British fort on himself. The rest of the commanders of the fleet look at one another, decide to follow Galvez. They do. It's a short battle that takes place when a ball of hot shot, I don't know what that is, but if you take a cannonball and you put it down in the furnace and get it red hot and you fire it, it landed in the powder magazine, blew the fort to pieces. The British came out, little white flag, said, we give up. And that was basically it in 1781. So basically in 2 years, he has single-handedly conquered the 14th British colony that you read so little about, okay? So these are his attacks here, here, here. He then attacks Mobile, then he hits Pensacola, and then he attacks several ships in the lake and conquers the lake. So as a result, you see this whole area of West Florida is now under Spanish control, and that's why when in 1783, the Treaty of Peace is signed between England and the United States, establishing the United States, Florida goes back to Spain because they got it. United States, William Charles Cole Claiborne. W.C.C. Claiborne, born in 1775, a year before the Declaration of Independence. He's appointed to the Tennessee Supreme Court in 96. House of Representatives, 1797 to 1801. He takes Andrew Jackson's place, okay? 1801, Tom Jefferson makes him the governor of the Mississippi Territory. 1803, he supervises the exchange of here in the French Quarter of the flag coming down in the Louisiana Purchase. 1804 to 1812, he becomes the territorial governor of Louisiana. In 1810, he annexes West Florida. So what's all that about? What happens is in the Louisiana Purchase, West Florida, which is Spanish, is not included. But the people in West Florida want to be part of America, so they declare a revolution. They go to war and establish the Republic of West Florida. If you ever drive it on Highway 12, either way, you'll see this blue flag with a white star on it. It says West Florida. That marks the Republic of West Florida. For 74 days, they're a separate nation. And then they tie themselves in with the United States, okay? And he's one of the ones that does that. Elected the first governor of Louisiana, he's shocked by that because when an election takes place, he feels that the anti-American feelings are so strong that he wouldn't have a chance against a Creole, but I think the Creole's name was Mouton, but he beats him and next becomes governor. After his term over, he serves in the Senate until his death at the age of 42. So it's amazing. Some of these people die surprisingly young, and others die incredibly old, you know. What is his activities? He oversaw the incorporation of Louisiana into the United States territory, played a crucial role in the Battle of New Orleans, which we've all heard about, married 2 local women who he deeply loved, but both of them would die of yellow fever, which is a persistent problem in this area, and hopefully it'll never come back, but there's no telling, especially with all the fresh water we have laying around. His main job and his main problem was Americanizing Louisiana. Some would contend that still hasn't happened. Because Louisiana's, first of all, had no love for Americans or for America. That's why the old idea of the neutral ground came in. The Creoles and the Spanish were on one side, the Americans were on the other side, which was Faubourg-Saint-Maurice, the uptown area. They didn't speak English down here in Louisiana, so that was a problem. There was a French culture and Spanish culture. It certainly wasn't English. They were Catholic, my God, you know. The English were all in the rest of the colonies were all Protestant, except Maryland. They didn't understand representative government. Some would argue we still don't. But the fact is that they didn't because they didn't want to elect people to office because it meant they had to leave their homes and leave their families. And that just didn't seem like something you would do to somebody that you considered a friend. So the whole idea of doing that, they were very stuck in the way of looking at things under the rules of kings. So that's how they saw it. Most of them had never voted before because, again, they were under a monarchy all this time. Furthermore, Lasatte, the Frenchman, and Casacalvo, the Spaniard, had refused to leave Louisiana and was kind of upsetting the apple cart by always aggravating the situation around him. So Claiborne had a very difficult time. Also, they did not accept the American legal system because they had the French legal system. So the transition here was tough. And a lot of people in the United States did not want Louisiana to become part of the Union because of these differences. They thought the Gulf was just too big to breach. And in fact, Louisiana does track a different course than any other state of the Union when it comes to becoming a state. I'm jumping way ahead now to Huey. Look at that smile, huh? Born August 30th, 1893, died 1935. Died 42 years old. Amazing man. Origins. Sprung from the populous roots of Louisiana, pine line. There's a historian who wrote a thesis one time on called The Pine Line, and it kind of makes sense. You know, the environment around us does affect our lives. And the idea was that, you know, we have trees, deciduous trees and pine trees and all this. You have all the delta country where the ground is rich in soil. And you know, if you go up in North Louisiana, it's that red clay and pine trees. And the idea was that all that rich soil was taken very early by the French and the Spanish. And what was left was everything up above that pine line, it's called, which was kind of hard to cultivate. As a result, the people who moved there were a hardy group of people. And they also were more or less subsistence type farmers, okay? So it's a different line. During the American Civil War, a lot of people from this area didn't want to fight, so they used to run away when they came with the enlistment troops into the woods. They called it fighting for General Greene, because they didn't want to be part of the movement, because their attitude was it was a rich man's war, but a poor man's fight. I'm fighting for slavery, but I don't have slaves, but the people who have slaves are exempt from service. I don't understand, you know, so they didn't want to fight. In 1912 election, 36% of Wynn Parish voted for Eugene Debs, a socialist, who would end up being in prison in the First World War because of his opposition to the war. So he really springs from these deep populist, socialist, almost revolutionary roots. He grew up comfortable, not poor, despite the fact that he used to like to make everybody think that. He grew up in a log cabin, if you listen to Huey. He always took his shoes off, he had holes in his socks and things like that. He loved to play to the poor and its common roots. His sisters hated it because they didn't like the idea of being considered poor because they weren't. Because Daddy was kind of meager means at the beginning, but then they built a railroad through Wynn Parish, and Daddy's property ended up adjacent to the city, so Daddy did pretty good. But Huey didn't want that to get out, so he kind of suppressed that. One of his favorite stories was that he used to wake up in the morning. This was when he was trying to capture the influence of South Louisiana, and wake up in the morning and hitch the buggy and take his Catholic parents to church, and then he would come back and, you know, hitch up the buggy again later in the afternoon and bring his Protestant grandparents to services. And somebody asked him and said, Huey, I didn't know you had Catholic grandparents. He says, I didn't have a buggy. But in reality, you know, he actually was better off than that. He got kicked out of high school because he tried to get the teacher removed. He organized a petition drive to remove the teacher because he didn't like the teacher. But he had a photographic memory. There's one famous scene in his high school, actually in his earlier days, where he's taking Latin, and the teacher obviously looks on his desk and he doesn't have a Latin book with him. So he tells, all right, Huey, you know, teachers are going to call on you if you don't have a book, right? We know that. That's the rule. And he immediately recites the passage. He says, well, give it to me in English. He gives it in English. He says, well, give me the next one in Latin. He does. The next one in English. Goes back and forth. Huey can answer it. He has memorized the book in Latin and English, okay? He has a photographic memory. There's an incident in New York where he gets on an elevator and the guy steps in. He looks at the guy, recognizes the guy, remembers his name, remembers his wife's name, does the mental calculation of how old his kids are, mentions his kids' names and knows how old they are and asks them what they're doing. The guy walks out the elevator. He hasn't seen this man in 20 years. The only other person in a memory like that was Edwin Edwards, believe it or not. It's true, you know. He's a salesman. Who would have thunk it? Like he said, I can sell anything to anybody. You know, he sold cotylene oil, faultless starch, and other things. Cotylene oil was the first synthetic oil. Everybody used to cook in lard. This was taking cottonseed oil, squeezing it down into a vegetable oil, and he used to go around, knock on people's doors, try to tell a lady, honey, I'll take that. Give me that apron. I'll put that. Let me show you how to make some biscuits. And he'd literally sit down and make biscuits and make dinner. But the idea was he was selling it. Then when he would get the people interested in the cotylene oil, they would go to the store and say, well, I want this cotylene oil. Then when he walked into the store, he said, you know what you need, cotylene oil? Yeah, my people have been asking for it. That's how he could sell it. He was doing a background operation there, which is typical Huey. He met his wife, Rose McConnell, in 1914 at a cake baking contest. Needless to say, he liked her, so she won. This is kind of a foreshadowing of laws in the future in elections. He goes to Tulane Law School, and there's an interesting story there. His brother Julius decides, look, you're married now, you have a young child on the way, it's time you made something of yourself, so I'll help you go through law school. He gets to law school, and Huey don't like school too much, and decides there must be another way to skin this cat, and that's Huey's life, finding other ways to skin a cat. So he goes through the law books and discovers that, you don't really have to go to law school to get a law degree. All you have to do is pass a bar exam and have a group of judges say that you know enough about the law that they vote and say that you can do it. So he sets that up. So with the remaining money he's got left, he hires the top guy in the class to tutor him. And then he goes through all the law books with this guy, gets these judges together, and they pass him, and he becomes a lawyer without going to law school. Reason Judge Merrick's name's there, later, as Long's career builds up, Judge Merrick will become one of the strongest anti-Long people around. He'll say, how did a rascal and lowlife like that ever become a lawyer in the state of Louisiana? And the guy, one of his aides said, well, no offense, Judge, but you did it. What? He goes and looks at the records, and sure enough, his name's on the paperwork for Huey Long to become a lawyer. As a lawyer, he mostly defended the poor, workman's comp cases, things like that. But then there was a case, he set up a shingle up in Shreveport. He just had like a fruit box with a typewriter on it and a lamp in the corner. He didn't have much of a law firm. But one of the executives of the Citizens National Bank was accused of embezzling and questionable deals. He really didn't seem like he was. It was more like the other bank guys are trying to get rid of this guy. He ran to every attorney in town. No attorney would take the case because nobody was going to fight Citizens Bank. Remember, this is the Bourbon period when all the money interests controlled the state. He ends up on Huey's bench. Huey says, sure, I'll take the case. Huey wins. He absolves the guy gets all kind of money. Huey gets $50,000. He proceeds to build a big house up on Shreveport, and he has wrought iron gates in the front. And he tells the guy that builds the wrought iron gates, I want the initial CNB put on the gates. And the guy looks at him, he says, Huey, your name is Huey Pierce Long. He says, no, but they paid for it, so they should at least have their name on it. Judge Harper is a treason case, that comes out of the First World War. Federal prosecutors are out to get Judge Harper, and Huey's trying to figure out he's going to skin this cat. Now, if any of you are familiar with law, when you have a jury trial, you can exclude certain people. So Huey's looking at the thing, I only got so many exclusions. They only have so many exclusions, so he's really good. He knows how to read people. He's been selling Cottolene oil. So he's looking at them, so he knows the people that he knows are going to go against him in the case. So typically Huey Long, when there's a break for dinner, he gets all of those people together, sits them down around the table, buys them lunch, sits down, cracking jokes, slapping them on the back. Federal prosecutors see this activity, they immediately start driving lines through these people's names. So when it comes time, Huey's got the federal prosecutors excluding their people, he then excludes the rest of them, and he wins the case. This is his log cabin, okay? You can see why his sisters were upset with him. And they got a car. This is 1913, okay? It's right after his dad died. So his sisters are like, what? No, I am not poor, okay? I'm doing good. This is a picture of him and Rose. Let's see if it goes. Come on. Political career. What happens here is he wants to go into politics, so he goes into the Louisiana Constitution, opens it up, and finds anything he can run for at the age of 25. He comes up to be public service commissioner, so he runs for it. Then after he gets it, he starts reading it, he goes, well, damn, this has got a lot of power. It controls waterways, it controls bridges, it controls railroads, it controls pipelines, it controls utility companies, telephones. So Huey becomes a firebrand and creates so much controversy that everybody in the state knows who he is because he's lowering rates on everything. He's sticking it to Standard Oil. We're making them pay 5 cents a barrel on oil. I mean, Huey is using this as a power base, and nobody's ever used anything like this before. So all of a sudden, everybody's standing up. People are against him, but what are they going to do? So in 1924, he decides to run for governor. He loses, and it's a combination of things. One, the weather got horrendous in 24. It'll continue beyond that. So his former friends can't come to vote because there's no roads in Louisiana, okay? Also, the issue of the Ku Klux Klan was very powerful in 1924, and Huey wasn't a racist, so he couldn't play the Klan game, so he stepped out of that. So many believe that's what cost him. He then runs in 1928. The background's different. He's done preparations. Huey's discovered a new thing. It's called radio. So he's attached onto radio like nobody's business. And he's got a friend of his named James Noe, N-O-E, W-N-O-E. And the two of them get together, and he opens up the airways, and Huey just starts blasting the airways. He's got trucks, sound trucks, weaving through the whole state. He's following the sound trucks behind him. It's like a parade where they would stump and set up posts. When Huey delivers a speech, if anybody heckles him, he's got bodyguards that grab the guy's arm, twist it behind his back, and pull him out the way. If there's a baby crying, a sucker is shoved in the kid's mouth. Huey's tactic is he figures he divides every parish into threes. 40% love the government, 40% hate the government, 20% I'll fight for. So he goes into the local parish and talks to the local sheriff. The sheriff says, hey, Huey, am I glad to see you? He'll walk out in his stump and say, that's the greatest sheriff you ever had in your life. That's a fine man you have there. And of course, he's got that 40%, and then through his talk, he'll get the other 20. If the sheriff says, yeah, I know you, Huey, and I don't want to see you, he walks out, no problem. He walks out and stump, that miserable, no good son of a gun sheriff's been running your life in the ground for too damn long. Now he's got 40% on that side, now let's fight for the other 20%. He ends up winning the election. But another big thing that helped him out was the Great Flood of 1927, because it wiped out everything west of Baton Rouge to east of Lafayette, from Monroe to the Gulf. All kind of people lost everything. We know what happened here in St. Bernard Parish when they blew the levees down here. People had no love for the powers that be, the old Bourbon leaders, because they didn't do anything to help. And there was a grudging resentment there that he took advantage of. Okay? He runs for the Senate in 32, and he stays in that position until he's assassinated in the state capitol, September 10th, 1935, at the age of 42. His last words are, as he's laying down bleeding to death, he jumps up, his eyes pop open, and says, God, don't let me die. I have so much more to do. At which point he falls back in bed, closes his eyes, and dies. So what did he do? What about this guy? I have two books here. If you want to read Huey Long, you got to read them both. I've showed this to all my classes. This is T. Harry Williams' book, Huey P.S. Long. If you read this book, he comes across as an absolutely wonderful populist. You will literally lay in bed killing yourself laughing at some of the antics this guy pulls off. The moxie he's got, the things that he does. This book, in this book here too, the first one, you wonder how could anybody kill a man like this great populist Huey P. Long? This book is Louisiana Hayride by Harnett Kane, written in 1944. Harnett Kane was an anti-Long. He goes through the fact that, yeah, he did a lot of things, but at what cost? He was a damn dictator. You didn't have any rights in Louisiana when Huey Long was alive. When you read this book, you feel like maybe it would have been best to have been strangled in the crib. You know, so you really, if you want to understand Huey, you got to read them both, because Huey is the yin and the yang. He does take Louisiana up from its knees and put it somewhere, but he does so at tremendous human cost, especially as it relates, you know, to our civil rights. What happens is, right after he gets elected, he imposes a tax on oil companies. Standard Oil was furious. They organized all their money and all their influence together. How am I doing? Ooh, I'm running out of time already? Okay, so they try to impeach him. They failed because of a round robin put together by a little lawyer from Plaquemines Parish named Leander Perez, where he basically has a list of 19 senators who won't go along with it. So everybody's in there ready to impeach Huey. They got it said it's a dead shoe deal. Perez stands up. It has to be recognized. Yes, I move we adjourn. He goes, adjourn? We got a trial. We can impeach this governor. Yeah, well, I got this piece of paper here that says that 19 guys won't go along with it, and will break your majority, so you're just wasting time. They adjourned. That was the end of the impeachment. But what he does is he then becomes a dictator. He builds 111 bridges, 331 to 2,300 miles of paved roads. First Mississippi River Bridge is planned, a new state capitol, a new charity hospital, literacy night schools. 100,000 people are trained literacy in night schools. Free books to all. They try to say you can't do that. It's illegal. You're giving it to private schools. He says, I'm giving it to schools. We'll give it to kids. Lowered LSU's tuition and improved the university. Tommy Warner would probably appreciate that, being a football coach, if you understand that he used to make plays, if you can imagine that. So here you are in a tight game and you get a play from the governor. It's a harebrained scheme idea, but are you not going to run it? I mean, the guy's going to fire you. He built mental institutions, built the seawall in New Orleans that backfilled back there, slashed property taxes, reduced utility rates, and established the first retirement fund for the elderly. Louisiana was on the cutting edge of social programming during his reign. Paid for the improvements through taxes on oil and all these extractive businesses. Okay? Two views of Long. That's why I didn't like him. The reason he got that black eye, I hope you don't mind me going on, do you? Because I didn't realize. Huey liked to drink gin fizzes. He's in New York. He's got to go to the bathroom real bad at a hotel. So he goes to the bathroom, there's a bunch of guys lined up at the urinal, so Huey decides, he walks behind the tallest guy, and he figures, I can probably make it between that guy's legs. You know, at which point this guy is sitting down, you know, doing his business and sees two streams instead of one, turns around and sees Huey weaving behind him, punches him out. It's not good for a U.S. Senator to come out of a men's room with a black eye. So needless to say, you know, these are the cartoons that came out about him. Of course, here's the other side, where you have all of his cronies talking about things. And look at Huey. It's almost like David's picture of Napoleon when he's with the candle burning down at 4 in the morning, scribbling, you know, this thing. Now here he is, got all the bills around him, the things that plans to build hospitals and all this kind of stuff. The lights on, so it's really late at night, and Huey's all dignified. He probably never looked that cleaned up. You know, dignified signing letters. He used these parts. He created his own newspaper, the Louisiana Progress. And a guy from the Times-Picayune was hammering with cartoons so bad that he called the guy in and hired him to do cartoons for him because, boy, you're good, you know. As a U.S. Senator, he actually forced Roosevelt into a new phase of the New Deal, providing support for banks, bankruptcy protection for farmers, Chapman bill for veterans. He thought the New Deal was too moderate. Roosevelt gets angry because he figures he's going to run for president. He's going to knock Roosevelt out. Roosevelt sends Treasury agents to wipe out Louisiana and put Huey in jail. The Treasury agents come back and say, if you want a graduate course in politics, President, you better go to Louisiana. Absolute power. As a senator, he controlled the United States. This is just read through this quick. 35 bills in a matter of days. Took control of the police juries. He had no problems with that. Taxed Standard Oil. Took over the Sewage and Water Board. Brought in troops, state troops, in elections in Louisiana to make sure they went his way. This is his book, Every Man a King. This is the book he was writing at the time he died. My first days in the White House. It's really an interesting read. Kind of comical in a way, though, because it's fanciful. This is Huey delivering a speech on a stump. This is a cover magazine, April 1935. Give him honor or give him death. That's what's written at the bottom here. Kind of makes you wonder, huh? This is Huey long after he was shot. He was met in the corridor of the of the Capitol when he came in by Dr. Carl Weiss. There's a lot of controversy about that to this day. It's like the Kennedy assassination. One of his bodyguards that was downstairs flirting with the girl behind the cash register heard one shot. Huey came running down the steps with blood in his mouth, said he hit me. Didn't say he shot me, he said he hit me. The old story is that Joe Messina, his bodyguard, when Weiss struck at him, whipped out his gun to protect Huey, and the gun went off and shot Huey in the back. That's one story. Other stories are that, you know, the Roosevelts wanted him killed because they knew. Farley told Roosevelt, you better watch this man, because he's going to take the election away from you. And that was his plan, to take the election away from the Democrats, let a Republican run it, because the Republican couldn't control the Depression. And then by that time, he'd mold Louisiana to an example of what could be done, and then run for president himself. This is them burying him right at the foot. So if you ever go to the Capitol, you know, they got the monument with the statue. He's buried under it, you know, pointing at the star. You son of a guns, you better do what I tell you to do. This is Dr. Weiss. I mean, they emptied their revolvers in the man. He was a young doctor, had a 6-month-old baby, had just doing his rounds at the hospital, and that's why a lot of people say it was incongruous for him to do that. But we will never know. We will never know. An autopsy was never done. A bullet was never recovered. His legacy? Centralized control, high government appointees, absolute. He created the power of the governor of Louisiana the way we see it today. Variety of social programs, hospitals, schools, literacy programs, mental institutions, free textbooks, internal improvements. When he dies, the Louisiana scandals start where a lot of his friends go to jail. One of the favorite things he used to do is when he hired you for a job, he'd give you a piece of paper to sign and say, what's that? That's your resignation. But I just got hired. Yeah, sign it. Because if I ever get tired of you, I'm going to put a date on it and I'm going to sign it, and you'll find out in the mail that you're gone. You know, it's a good way to control people. He also had the deduct box, so 10% of everything had to go into it. Now we got the last of the Red Hot Papas. Uncle Earl. Uncle Earl. 1895, Wynn Parish, younger brother. I have to go through this quick because I know him over time. At age 5, this is what happened to him. He drank lye, and that's why he had that grumbly voice. I used to hear all the time. I remember in 1960, the campaign, when he'd get on the TV, when the first televised, he had that graspy, grovelly voice. It's because he drank lye when he was a kid. His first business was selling hog offal to poor blacks in the neighborhood by the bucket. You know, he'd get 10 cents a bucket. But he was a businessman. He quit in 10th grade. School, became a traveling salesman. They all learned that. That was an important lesson to learn back then because you learn a lot about people. Entered LSU agriculture, then went to Loyola Law School. 1926, he became an attorney. Not a bad-looking guy. This is 17 years old. This is at age 28. Dapper. There's his lovely wife, Blanche Long. She's a graduate of Soule College. Most people say that she was really the classy side of him, you know. This is him delivering a speech. This is his cover. And Baton Rouge, I can't say, there's something like it's a long thing. Anyway, this interesting graphic in the back of the kingfish with a thing on a stream of gold. I think there's some allusion to something there. Governor Long, I think maybe the Lord decided I could make a better governor at 52 than 44. I guess the Lord knew what he was doing when he arranged it that way of maturity now. That's his inaugural address. He thanked the common people. I'll go through it. He supported the poor and the disabled, completed programs of public benefits. He also spent the entire surplus that the preceding governors gave him and put us in incredible bonded debt. Hey, but you got a lot of things. You just now got to find a way of paying for it. He equalized teacher pay for black and white. One thing about the Longs, and you look at the age they lived in, they were not racists, okay? And then the age they live in, that's a pretty tough one. In 1950, he suffered a serious heart attack, which made him retreat to his peach patch farm. There's Long with he loved his watermelons. And there he is at his peach patch farm. There's a sketch of the farm. This is a cartoon done of Long and his wife, and this is all the craziness going on, you know, around him. The cartoons, they hated the Longs. The people hated the Longs. He runs for governor in 1956. I love this one. Don't write anything you can phone. Don't phone anything you can talk face to face. Don't talk anything you can smile. Don't smile anything you can wink. Don't wink anything you can nod. He took command over the legislature just like his brother, running all over around, but by this time things had taken its toll. He started becoming erratic. He started taking pills. He started drinking a lot of alcohol, betting the horses, and he also started hanging out in the French Quarter and met a delightful young lady by the name of Blaise Starr. He carried on a rather open relationship with her, which caused incredible embarrassment to Blanche and to the state of Louisiana. Here's Blaise. I mean, she even had her own sign. This is Diane Arbus was a famous photographer. Blaise was so famous that she went to her apartment and took a picture of her with a little French poodle. And this is a picture of the two of them together. I think she was something like 23, 24 years old, and he was 60. He was declared insane in 1959 because what happened was, and now people read the thing as a speech he delivered that rambled on for 90 minutes, almost like one of my lectures. And what happened was when people started reading it, they started realizing that what it was one of the first real civil rights speeches by a governor of Louisiana, because he was angry because they were disenfranchising poor blacks in general, and poor whites. That was his power base, okay? So he went up on the podium, let's see if I get this thing to work, and basically he started, like I said, drinking and everything. He addressed it. I'll go through this quick, 90 minutes on television, civil rights speech. He was escorted from the Capitol and transported to the Harris Psychiatric Clinic in Galveston, Texas. Here he is preparing for the speech. Here he is with a pillowcase over his head as he's being let out. When he gets out, he promises he'll go to Mandeville if they let him out. So they let him out of Texas. They put him in Mandeville. As soon as he gets to Mandeville, he calls a doctor in and he says, "Let me out of here." The guy says, "I'm not letting you out of here. The deal was you got to go to Mandeville." He says, "You're not letting me out?" He says, "No." He says, "Fine, you're fired. I'm the governor. Hire somebody else. You gonna let me out?" "Yeah, you're now the head of the hospital." And he got out and walked. I was like, "Wait a minute." You know, so that's how he did it. I'm stuck here. There we are. You might have to help me up there, Nicholas. Let's see. He finished the term. He then tried to put Jimmy Davis in his place, who ran. Davis ran against Chet Morrison. I think a lot of us remember that one. I remember that campaign. I remember Morrison had an ad where there was a wicker chair, and he did this whole thing, and he backed up. There's a bigger wicker chair behind the little wicker chair. He says, "Natural Long," sitting right behind him. It was a really brutal campaign, okay? But Davis beat Morrison by 73,000 votes. And Long had a great legacy. He established the University of New Orleans. Back then it was LSUNO. That's why the Earl K. Long Library is named after him. He felt that people in the city of New Orleans have a right to go get a college education. They shouldn't have to pay for it. When I was there in the late 1960s, I remember we were outraged because full-time tuition went to $100. Because it used to be free to get a college education under Huey Long. But he wasn't finished. Last of the Red Hot Peppers. There we are. He couldn't stay away from politics. He threw himself into the 8th Congressional District seat. He ran for campaign from back of trucks. I mean, he was in bad health. His heart was bad. He was on pills. He was on alcohol. He was old. He was having problems. Nevertheless, he covered the entire district. He attacked McSween. He was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He couldn't get it out with a crowbar or a screwdriver. McSween said this is going to be one of the worst vicious campaigns in the country. You couldn't deal with this man. He was absolutely nuts. But nevertheless, he was aggressive. This is him on the campaign. Look at the fire in him yet. Here he is on the stump. Interesting picture. Here he is with the black community here, and here he is with the white community there, and you tell them both the same thing. You know, because his message was for poor people. Okay? This is last term presidents of integration, segregation, the press, legislation. Here he is with the bottles, the pills, the booze, and all. He wins the election. He's in Alexandria at the Bentley Hotel. They put him in the bed. He waits to find out the election returns. He finds out that he wins, and he dies 9 days later. You know, and that's the end of Earl Long. There's his funeral. And again, look at the mix of people, black and white, all mixed together. This is the height of segregation, 1960s. But they're all together passing his casket. Uncle Earl's legacy: extensive paved road construction, farm roads especially, pension programs for the elderly, veterans benefits, hot lunch for needy children, adult education for people, established trade and technical schools, places like around here. He was big on that. The University of New Orleans, extensive support for education throughout Louisiana, protection of voting rights. Uncle Eddie. This is not history, this is journalism, you know, because he's still around. I mean, this guy breaks my heart, because if there ever was a man who had it all, had more promise, more education, more moxie, more insight, more ability, this is the guy. This guy should go down as the greatest governor of Louisiana. But he just had sticky fingers. You know, and it's a shame, you know. He's the Cajun Prince, or Fast Eddie. Born 1927. Look at his resume. Graduate from LSU Law School at the age of 21. Imagine that. 1954, he's a Crowley City Council. 1965 to 72, the House of Representatives. 1972, won the first of 4 terms, actually it's 3, as governor. Bennett Johnson, 50 to 49. Some say Bennett really won the election because he became a U.S. Senator. Louisiana, he protected civil rights, increased the severance tax on crude oil and linked it to the price of it instead of just linking it to the barrel. Streamlined state government operations, set up a cabinet style of government instead of commissions and boards. Appointed more African Americans and women to government than ever had been done before. The open primary system. I've been a registered independent all my life. I didn't vote half the time until they had the open primary system. Now I can actually cast a ballot. I think they're changing that, which means I'll be disenfranchised again. Massive increase in spending with the oil money. Reputation for flamboyancy, charisma, well-dressed, quick, clever ones. I mean, he had the quickest one-liners you ever met in your life. I've noticed him every time, if you watch a film of Edwin Edwards, when he dedicates something, he cuts the ribbon. It's amazing. Because he got the ribbon there, he sits down, he smiles, he takes it, looks at the picture, cuts the ribbon, he cuts a section of it off. In the section, he finds the prettiest girl out there, and he gives it to her. I said, this guy's a charmer. Ethics problems. Illegal campaign contributions, Tungsten Park. His argument there was $10,000 appeared in his wife's purse. He said, well, it's her money, it's not mine. Poor Elaine, nobody did anything. 1 Edward Square, which was a building he had set up where people that did contracts with the state would have to lease out of the building. That was a story that was out there. Whether it's true or not, we don't know, but he was investigated for it. He was indicted 11 times, I believe. He used to go to Las Vegas under the name of T. Wong. You know, put a lot of money. That's why Clyde Verdreen, if you want to read an interesting book, it's Just Taking Orders. Because Clyde Verdreen almost went to prison because Clyde was on his credit card, and Edwards would pay him with cash. Well, when it came time for IRS, Clyde had this incredible credit card bill, but no income to justify it, the fact that he was paying all this off. Well, it was all Eddie's debts. His chief assistant, Roma, went to jail, convicted with Carlos Marcello. So he's had this colorful side. 3rd term, remember this one? The only way I could lose this election if caught in bed with either a dead girl or a live boy. He could say anything. He goes against Stream. Remember the trip to Paris? $10,000 a person, paid off the entire campaign debt. But revenue started faltering. You know, the money starts disappearing in Louisiana with oil. Finally, you know, in 1985, he's indicted for hospital deals when they had the little deals with the hospitals. You know, because what he claimed was he left the governor's office and he was just an attorney, so he cut the deals. Then he became governor again. He passed them through. So they got him on indictment. He said, well, I was a private citizen when I did it. He knew how to walk that line. But the sad part is he didn't have to. You know, the man had enough as it was. I mean, he didn't think legacy. He didn't think legacy, which is sad because God, he could have done for us. The trial damaged his reputation because all the stories of womanizing, gambling, cash, and all that started coming out. 1991 campaign, we all remember that one against David Duke. Let me see if I can get this thing going. Decides to run again. Everybody said he shouldn't do it. That's when David Duke enters the race. It was a runoff. Remember, vote for the crook, it's important. And the other one, better a lizard than a wizard. You know, those are the bumper stickers. It's kind of sad. You know, campaign on leaving a good legacy. Can you imagine that? You know, Edwards wins by an incredibly wide margin on that one. Nobody thought he had a chance, but he did. But then casino gambling comes in. Louisiana had a state constitutional law against gambling, so we called it gaming and went through anyway. Questions of corruption arise because of the riverboat licenses and all that sort of stuff. He's finally indicted another time because this time the FBI was waiting for him. He built a new house. I've always wondered about this. Now, we built an embassy in Moscow and let Russians build it. And when they took the thing apart, they found they had bugs all over the thing. Well, he was building a big house, and somehow I got the feeling the contractors all probably had badges in their back pocket because apparently they bugged this thing from top to bottom, and that's where they got a lot of their information on him. Wouldn't surprise me. Anyway, he was convicted of fraud, extortion, and racketeering. October 22nd, he arrived at a federal penitentiary in Fort Worth, Texas. He's presently now in Oakdale in federal penitentiary in Louisiana. And I think he's got, what, about 5 or 6 more years to his term, and he's about 80. So it'd be interesting to see if he survives the term and makes it out. And what's his, I mean, this story isn't over yet, okay? I really don't believe this story. I think if this man ran today, he would win. I'd be honest with you. And looking at what we're dealing with right now with Blanco, I might even vote for him, you know? Because, I mean, God, it's sad. Anyway, his legacy, Edwards is likely the most educated, talented, charismatic man to ever hold the office of governor of the state of Louisiana, and I believe that. He committed himself to a program of state improvement and left a strong social program, legacy of social programs. However, his inability to place public good above private gain undercut all of his accomplishments. Edwards is perhaps the greatest disappointment. He could have left the greatest legacy of any Louisiana government. Instead, he is closing out his life in prison. Sad. Conclusions. Obviously, with 72 Louisiana governors to choose from, many interesting people had to be omitted. Nevertheless, the short list presented proves beyond doubt that Louisiana is not Kansas, Dorothy. Things are different down here. Thank you so much.